Well, good evening tonight. You guys are so responsive. About 3 years ago, during the summer break of between my freshman and sophomore year of college, but back before that, I told God and I told everyone else that I would never preach. Never would preach. I hated being in front of people. I hated being up speaking, so I would never preach. And about that summer, God started working on my heart, started dealing with me, and I didn't really want to admit it, but finally at Pilgrim Camp, actually, God was really dealing with me there, and one of the services, Brother Case spoke, and I felt like God wanted me to go to the altar. I went to the altar, and I felt like he was telling me that was the case, and that's what he wanted me to do for my life, and I thought I would get God pretty good and give him a pretty good fleece that he just couldn't answer. So I was like, well, Lord, this whole altar's lined with people. So if Brother Case comes to me specifically and all these people at this altar, and he prays with me about becoming a preacher, then I'll preach for you. And I was like, well, I got one good on God there. He ain't going to come to me. And the next thing I know, Brother Case is right there in front of me, praying as hard and loud. And I was like, seriously, Lord, I get the case. I get it. But it still doesn't mean that I enjoy it, or I enjoy it, but I'm the definition of nervous right now. Well, as Brother Forster was saying, right now I'm preparing, getting some experience before I go to the mission field. I went to Honduras this past summer, came back dying to go back within the next 2 days. Within about 1 month here, I realized, Jeremy, slow down. You need experience before you go. So I talked to several different people and organizations, and actually doing the impossible and going with 2 different organizations at one time because I want to stay Pilgrim. Yet ICHA is down there, so I'm actually joining both organizations at the same time. And you all can forgive me for that later. ICHA gives me the biggest time for being a Pilgrim. So, well, tonight I'd like to talk about one of my favorite stories in the Bible. If you'll turn your Bibles to Matthew chapter 14. We'll stand for the reading of God's Word tonight. So Matthew chapter 14, reading verses 22 through 33. And it says, and straightway Jesus constrained his disciples to get into his ship, to go before him into the other side, while he sent the multitudes away. And when he had sent the multitudes away, he went up into a mountain apart to pray. And when the evening was come, he was there alone. The ship was now in the midst of the sea, tossed with the waves, for the wind was contrary. And in the 4th watch of the night, Jesus went to them, walking on the sea. And when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were troubled, saying, it's a spirit. And they cried out in fear. But straightway Jesus spake unto them, saying, be of good cheer, it is I, don't be afraid. Peter answered him and said, Lord, if it be thou, bid me to come into the water with thee. And he said, come. And when Peter was come down out of the ship, he walked on the water to go to Jesus. But when he saw the wind boisterous, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried, saying, Lord, save me. And immediately Jesus stretched forth his hand and caught him, and said, O thou of little faith, wherefore didst thou doubt? When they were come to the ship, the wind ceased. Then they that were in the ship came and worshipped him, saying, of a truth thou art the Son of God. That's Brother Wellbaum would pray for us today.
Father, we thank you, Lord, for the scripture tonight. We bless parents. May our hearts will be open to you. You will speak to each one of us tonight. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Well, as I was preparing this message, I was thinking about different fears that people have. And who here is afraid of something? Just anything. No one's afraid of anything? Oh, yeah, there's some people. Let's just admit it. We're all afraid of something at some time in our lives. I have several fears. Snakes, spiders, just rather not see one. And if I do see one, it's better dead than alive. While I was in Honduras this summer, before I went, I was reading up on Honduras, reading up on the different stats about Honduras. If you look at anything about Latin America, you'll find one thing. It's extremely dangerous. And the internet will tell you terrible, horrible stories about people dying. And so when I went to Honduras, I was a little bit afraid. And I wasn't afraid. I was just very aware of my surroundings. And I remember the first night they left me in my place that I was staying. They left me alone for the first night. And I was oh, it's okay, it's fine. Nothing's going to happen tonight. And before they left, they told me, don't go outside. If someone knocks on the gate, don't go to the gate. Don't do this, don't do that, don't do that. So I'm already like, okay, this is a little freaky. So while I'm sitting there, I think I was reading my Bible or something before I went to sleep, and all of a sudden, this big, loud banging noise. And I was like, it's a gun. It is a gun. And for a second, my heart was sunk, and I was like, oh no, what's happening, what's happening? And about maybe 15 minutes later, it went off again. I was like, oh, that actually is fireworks, not a gun. So we're all afraid of a little something. As I was searching up different fears, phobia actually is an extreme or irrational fear of something. And scientists have classified 500 different types of phobias. And there's several different phobias out there. If you want a good laugh, just go on there and read some of them. There's actually websites to help you get over your phobias too. So a couple of mentionables tonight that I would like to mention is, I don't know if I'm saying it right or not, but there's a nymptophobia, which is the fear of staying single. And it's definitely something in my life that I have. and then the second one that I found very interesting that I had no clue that people would struggle with. It's called a blutophobia. It's actually the fear of taking a bath. And I know several Bible college students that struggle with that. But anyways, and this is probably going to sound kind of random right now, but I'm going to bring it back around a lot later. I read an article on this, actually. An 80-year-old man in Iran. Maybe you've heard this story. He actually has this fear. And he hasn't just gone a year or 2 weeks, year. He's gone 60 years without taking a bath. 60 years. I cannot believe that. I can take 2 showers in a day if I wanted to, really. But the reason he doesn't, he said, is he believes that cleanliness brings him sickness. But the article went on to say that on the healthy side, he does keep his hair neat and trimmed by burning it over a fire. He's quite dedicated to his fear there. But no matter what our fear is, we all face something that we feel is impossible. We all have a fear that we're going to fail. We have a fear of something. And today we meet a man in a story who had a pretty great fear. Before the story starts, we actually see in the verses previous to this that Jesus fed the 5,000 with 5 loaves and 2 fishes. And then it goes on, and he sent the multitudes away, and then he put the disciples on a ship, and he went up to the mountain to pray. And this whole time I've always wondered, Jesus probably knew this was happening. He knew this was going to happen. And I wonder if he was watching them out there like, oh my. But continuing on into verse 23, we see that, 24. We see that as they were going out into the sea, they were rowing their boats across the ocean, the little sea there, and a storm came up. It actually is a pretty common thing on the Sea of Galilee for storms to come up. We read several times throughout the Bible there's a storm on the Sea of Galilee. But this was a particular bad one. It says in the 4th watch of the night, which is basically halfway through the night, and they were only halfway through the sea at that point. So they'd been really trying pretty hard all night. They were probably worn out, exhausted, and all of a sudden, Jesus has the audacity to walk on the water towards them. They're probably really freaked out at this moment. And they cried out, it's a spirit, it's a spirit. And they're all afraid. And Jesus is like, oh, shut up. It's okay. Be of good cheer. It's I. Don't be afraid. And Jesus probably wouldn't have said shut up, actually. Be nice. Anyways, in verse 27, it says, so straightway Jesus spake to them, to be of good cheer. It's I. Be not afraid. And then Peter, the impulsive, maybe we would call stupid one, he's like, oh, I'm going to take the opportunity of this. And he says, Lord, if it's you, if it's really you, bid me to come onto the water unto thee. And I wonder if Peter actually really thought that Jesus was going to say, come. Maybe he didn't, I don't know. But anyways, Jesus said, come. And Peter, again, the impulsive one, the one that cut the ear off the person, I mean, he is a very impulsive guy. He just steps out there and he's walking on the water to Jesus. And he ain't thinking of anything about it. And then in verse 30, suddenly, he realizes what he is doing. And it says, but when he saw the wind boisterous, he was afraid. And beginning to sink, he cried, Lord, save me. I don't know how big the storms on the sea out there can get. But I've seen different videos. The sea can be pretty boisterous, as a word there says, boisterous during storm times. So I'm sure that it was pretty big waves, probably way taller than Peter was. And, as he first got out there, it was cool, it was fine. But then suddenly he saw the storm around him. And we noticed one thing throughout this whole thing is that before this, his eyes were on Jesus. He had the right focus. He was looking at Jesus. He was focused on the fact that Jesus could do it. Before this, we see he fed the 5,000. Jesus fed the 5,000. If I were Peter at that moment, I'd probably have ultimate faith in God, because feeding 5,000 people with 5 loaves and 2 fishes is quite the ratio there, and that's pretty impossible. So as he steps out, he's stepping out in full faith, and then he sees a storm around him and he gets scared. And so then Jesus asks him, "Why did you doubt?" So from this little story today, I'd like to ask 3 questions. First of all, where was Peter's eyes? Where was his focus? What was he focusing upon? And where are our eyes? Where's our focus? And finally, what is the right focus? So as I've already gone through the story today, and I've already shown you a little bit of what's going on here. Like I said, Peter stepped out in full faith. He had seen Jesus heal thousands of people up to this point. There's a verse before here, I don't know exactly where it is, but it says he went to this village and all that were sick that came to him were healed. And that's quite a few people. And throughout his ministry, Jesus healed thousands and thousands of people. And then he feeds the 5,000 with 5 loaves and 2 fishes. Over and over and over, Jesus proved to Peter that he was the God who specialized in the impossible. But as Peter was stepping out of the boat, he had that full faith. He knew that Jesus could do it. And as he was walking on the water towards Jesus, the storms of life around him, he kind of realized that he didn't calculate for all this. That he kind of realized finally that he was doing the impossible. He was literally walking on water, which I don't think anyone's done here. And if they're like me, they probably walk on water like a rock does. And so we see he had the right start. He started out right, but then he lost focus on the fact that he served the God who specialized in the impossible. His eyes fell to the bigness of the storm. His focus got off of Jesus and onto what he was doing and how impossible it was. And in that moment, his trust in God really started to waver. And later on in the verse, when Jesus says, "Oh, thou of little faith," literally means he lacked confidence in me, the one who has done all these things, to prove to you that I could do these things. And but then in verse 3, or in verse 30 and 31, we see that his focus went back to Jesus. And he called out for help, and he cried out and asked Jesus to save him. And just as Peter did, I think, so many times, we get into the same mess in our own lives. As we start out spiritually, as we start out into our walk with Christ, so many times we have such faith in the God that can move mountains, in faith in him, because he's proved it to us over and over. We read the Bible, he's done it over and over and over. But then we hit our first problem, our first mountain looks way too high and way too big, and if you're a logical guy like I am, 2 + 2 = 4, and so that mountain's too big, I can't get over it. But it's not the right focus. So many times, just as Peter did, we look around at our circumstances, around at our problems in life, and we begin to lose focus on the fact of what God can do and start focusing on the problems around us. Our eyes fall to how big the problem is, how impossible it is, and our trust in God wavers in that moment, and we start to doubt him. But just as Peter did, we also can regain our focus on Christ. We need to lift our eyes to Christ. We need to regain trust in him, call out to him for help, and he'll help us through our battles and trials. And in another verse, Isaiah 26, 3 and 4, we see what the right focus is. And these are some of my favorite verses of the Bible, which I have several favorite verses. But in these verses, it very clearly to me shows me what the right focus is, how to have the right focus. In verse 3, we read, Thou wilt keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on thee, because he trusteth in thee. Trust ye in the Lord Jehovah forever, for in the Lord Jehovah is everlasting strength. I don't know about you, but I love when the Bible, it just speaks plainly and clearly. You don't have to be a theologian. You don't have to have a doctorate's degree to understand what that's saying. Someone as simple as a small child can understand what that's saying there. Yeah, maybe it's a little bit old English for them to understand, but what that's saying is a mind stayed on Christ, a mind focused on him, a mind focused on the God who can do the impossible, God who specializes in the impossible. And as I was preparing this message, I was thinking about that statement there, God who specializes in the impossible. When we have a problem with our heart, we go to the cardiologist, the doctor who specializes in diseases treating the heart. If we have a disease on the skin, we go to a dermatologist because he specializes in dermatology, skin. And we serve a God who specializes in the impossibility. So having the right focus is going to him in those times when we face something impossible, when we face something that we don't feel like we can conquer, because he specializes in the impossible and he can take care of it. A mind focused on Christ knows that God's going to care for him in the midst of the problems they face. I actually have a friend of a friend of a friend kind of deal, but they have a really interesting story to be told. Actually not of holiness background, but of different background. And maybe about 2 years ago, this fellow was diagnosed with stage 4 lymphoma, which, if you know anything about cancer, stage 4 is the worst stage. You have basically no time to live after that. And the doctor gave him 2 months to live. And I saw actual pictures of the scan, x-ray, whatever thing it was. I'm not medical, so I don't know what it's called. But I saw pictures of it, and I can tell you, his whole body was full of cancer. Every single part of his abdominal cavity, his chest cavity was full of cancer. And he started quickly going downhill. He lost 60 pounds really fast. He couldn't walk, and then he was bedridden. But the whole time, he and his wife had a different view of God's healing power. And instead of focusing on the circumstances around them, they decided to focus on the fact that God specializes in the impossible. And so while most of us that looked on had no faith to it, and most of us who saw it thought, nah, it's never going to happen, they believed that God was going to heal him. And they prayed every day. They quoted scriptures on healing. They pleaded the blood of Jesus. They claimed his promises. Each and every day, they focused on him. What more can you say? And I remember most of us that looked on were like, they really, really just need to come to grips with reality, because stage 4 cancer means you're dying. You're going to die. So you need to come to grips with that reality, because you're going to die. And months went by, and they still trusted God for his healing. And finally, I think it might have been like 6 months to 9 months later, they went in for another test, same test that they'd done before, and found all the cancer in the pictures I had seen. And the doctors were like so completely shocked. In fact, they're so shocked that they thought they had the wrong patient. So they redid the test. So, it was twice, pretty good evidence. And the second time they did the test, it showed the same exact results. The results showed absolutely no cancer in his abdomen, his chest abdomen. And I saw like the before and after pictures, and it's like black and white, basically, difference. It's crazy, the difference. But they chose to do as those verses say, and they kept their mind focused on Christ, on him, and they had that perfect peace throughout that, and he met their need. And so today I wonder, like, what is our biggest problem, our biggest fears? What are they? What's the thing that really you don't feel like God can fix or God can help you through? At the beginning, I mentioned the guy who had the fear of taking a bath. And I don't know about you, but when I read that story, I may or may not have felt like throwing up. It was so disgusting to me that someone was so stupid to believe that they didn't need to take a bath because it was going to cause them to have a sickness. How stupid can you be, in my opinion? That's one of the most basic hygiene principles to me. The first things my mom taught me was how to take a bath. And as I began to think about that, actually, I was like, wow, I wonder how God looks on me in moments of my lack of faith, in my moments of thinking that God can't take care of this problem in my life because it's too big. Really, if you think about it, as hygiene is the most basic, or bathing is one of the most basic hygiene principles, faith is one of the most basic Christian principles. The first thing you do as a believer in Christ is have faith. The ABCs of salvation. What is the B? Believe. So one of the first things you do as a Christian is have faith. So why is it so hard to have faith? Why is it so hard to keep our focus on Christ in the midst of circumstances around us that we may never understand, and it may seem like it's so big and we don't know how to get across it, how to get over it? And why is that? Well, I read a statement somewhere. I actually read a story on it. Don't have the author's name or anything, but I'm sure many of you have heard the illustration of the two greatest tools the devil uses, and those are discouragement and doubt. First of all, discouragement comes when the devil's like, look, that problem's too big. You're not going to get through it. And you get discouraged. And suddenly you start doubting that Christ can actually help you cross over that. And these tools I've seen God use in my life over and over and over and over again. And probably one reason that God gave me this message was because it honestly is the thing that I struggle with the most. In my spiritual life, one of the hardest things to do is to look at a God who can take care of the impossible. It's so hard to focus on that when circumstances seem so big. But it's so awesome to serve him. I remember the day that God saved me. I was raised in a Christian home, and I had a pastor as a father, and my Sunday school teacher was my mother, and I just had it all. I was lined up to be a Christian, you know, and that was the one thing that I chose not to do. I wasn't a full-out rebellious teenager, but I more played the part of the hypocrite and went to church and acted like I was good when I was really, really bad at home. And I remember it was coming up on 5 years ago now, I guess. Yeah, 5 years ago, in June. It was in 2012, actually. I was 17, I think. And I was sitting there, and God had been dealing with me throughout. It was actually Pilgrim Camp. God had been dealing with me through Pilgrim Camp, and I knew that I needed help, and I knew that I wasn't where I needed to be spiritually. And I remember at that moment, the devil threw so many different circumstances at me, threw so many different things. He showed me all the discouraging aspects of life and made me doubt that God could actually save me in that moment. I was a pastor's kid. I knew everything. To me, honestly, there's nothing worse than someone who's been raised in the church and goes out and comes back. Like, I would rather be the worst sinner as to play the part of a hypocrite. To me, that's worse. And so in that moment, I was like, I don't know, God. I failed you so many times, I don't really know if it can work this time. And around that time, one of my friends, Jordan Jackman, he was here this morning. He came up to me, and being the annoying friend that he is, not really annoying, but he could tell there was something wrong with me, and he asked me, what's going on? Once we started talking, a long story short, I finally gave in to the fact that God could do it for me. I realized that my focus was off of what Christ could do, off of what his power was, and he saved me that night. And through that, since then, there's been several times throughout my life that I've gone through problems, I've gone through trials, temptations, battles, and different things. And so many times it seems like the devil has told me over and over again, you're not going to make it. That mountain's too high for you, and you might as well not even try to cross it. So just stay right there, or go back, just lose out, fail out. And every time I've chosen not to, and I've chosen to keep going on, and a lot of times I've lost focus, and I've looked at the waves around me, and I've calculated that in my logic brain that that's a very illogical fact that God can take care of the impossible, right? And many times I've had to come back around and keep my mind on him. And each and every time, God's never failed me. I know maybe you're like, well, you've only been a Christian for 5 years, but I'm sure you could ask any one of these people in this auditorium tonight, and they would tell you the same thing, that God has brought them through so much. So I don't know what our problems are in life. I don't know what things each and every one of us face. I know each and every one of us have problems. We come up against circumstances we don't think we can face, we don't think we can go through. But I just want to remind you tonight that we serve a God who specializes in the impossible. And if we keep our mind stayed on him, we'll be kept in perfect peace. And if we trust in him, we'll have that perfect peace in our heart. He's going to take us through the storms. He's going to take us through the valleys, the mountains. And we just need to keep trusting in him and through all this time.